reporting. Will you please kindly join us on the stage?
Vamos a comenzar. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Muy buenas tardes con todos. Como ya comentaron, voy a ser el moderador de este panel. Muy agradecido por la invitación. A mediados del año 2023, la organización CReCER publicó las dos NIF de sostenibilidad en versión final, ¿no? La NIF S1, que habla sobre requerimientos generales de sostenibilidad, que es una norma madre, una norma amplia, sobre la cual se van a hacer la emisión de las siguientes NIF de sostenibilidad. Y simultáneamente se emitió la NIF S2, que es una norma de carácter climático que conecta con la información financiera. Estas dos NIF de sostenibilidad están vigentes al cierre de la información financiera 2024. Sin embargo, la aplicación obligatoria para cada país o jurisdicción es establecida según el regulador de cada país y jurisdicción. En nuestra región, Brasil, Costa Rica y México, en ese orden, fueron los países que lideraron y fijaron una fecha para la aplicación obligatoria de estas dos NIF de sostenibilidad. El objetivo que tenemos en esta conversación, en esta plenaria, es tener la información directa de las autoridades y los representantes y académicos de estos países con respecto a desafíos, decisiones y reflexiones en el camino hacia la adopción. Entonces, ya los han presentado. Voy a explicar un poco la dinámica. Tenemos aproximadamente una hora y esta hora la vamos a dividir en 4 pequeños bloques. ¿Okay? El primer bloque básicamente va a ser una pregunta general para ustedes 3 y para esto tenemos aproximadamente 7 minutos. ¿Okay? Luego tenemos una segunda pregunta, pero que está enfocada en la realidad de cada país, muy particular a cada país. Y una pregunta final ya de reflexión. Y cerramos con una sesión de más o menos 10 minutos de preguntas de ustedes. Así que vamos a empezar. Bueno, se está proyectando, es una guía de un resumen de las IFRS incorporando temas de sostenibilidad. Pueden acceder al QR, es gratuita, la pueden descargar para ustedes. Así que voy a hacer la primera pregunta para los 3. ¿Okay? Cuéntenos, por favor, cuéntenos un poco sobre cuál es el estado o la etapa actual del proceso de adopción de la NIF de sostenibilidad en cada uno de sus países. Y si en caso existen algunas adaptaciones o simplificaciones que hayan hecho de las normas en sus mercados, por favor, también nos gustaría poder escucharlas. Vamos a empezar contigo, Dunia. Por favor, adelante.
Gracias. Si me ayudan con la presentación, en nuestro país hemos, desde el colegio, actuado en 3 líneas. La primera, difusión, porque sin la adecuada difusión a todos los actores del mercado y del país no se crea conciencia y no se va a crear un compromiso y se crea así. Lo que buscamos es que las personas de todas las áreas sientan en la sostenibilidad no un requerimiento formal más, sino una oportunidad y una forma de contribuir al negocio en marcha, la sostenibilidad de las empresas, de la sociedad como tal. La parte de lo que ha sido la escalabilidad, hemos buscado que fuera obligatoria para los grandes actores. Nuestro país es muy pequeño, son 145 entidades del sector financiero, seguros, valores, operadoras, más 953 empresas que llamamos grandes contribuyentes. Ellas representan un
1.6% of the entire tax list, but from the point of view of tax collection, they account for 65% of a national tax collection. and this would have a multiplier effect across markets with the objective of getting this to be fully mandatory by 2027, together with professional updating that we started with 3 modules and now 5 modules. And last year we have focused on the practical application, because without knowledge this cannot be done. This training program is open, virtual, so that there will be no scheduling issues. It's free of cost, and you may study the modules that you may require. So the objective is that our professionals and professionals in other areas are available, are familiar with this proposal. We have 60,000 over members of an association, and with a view of this objective, we have also cooperated with other national players, because if the state is not committed and the entrepreneur does not see a return, there will be no sustainability. They did not believe in the standards if they feel this is only a formal presentation. And with the Financial Council, CONACEF, we have agreed on a 2027 objective for the sustainable financial reporting. This has involved 200 players to update the public offerings regulations, and we have created also at the level of government contracting and procurement, together with the Ministry of Finance, a board, a council for a sustainable procurement and a national sustainable procurement practices that includes in the national procurement law an incentive for companies to create sustainable goods and services and compete by giving them for this compliance, we're complying with this point, additional scores in procurement, and calls for supply. And at the Ministry of Finance, we're working in requiring government agencies to provide a sustainability training. They are advised that the sustainability standards are going to be adapted. So you are required to prepare a plan, because this will be a national effort and commitment. Now we are also discussing with the tax administration to allow for the discounting of the expenses incurred in sustainability training, because this is a cost that all private and government organizations have to take. So there's going to be a return in the profits and the flows, so that all market players get involved. Thank you very much, Dunia. Totally agree with you. The key for you is the national connection and the involvement of all interested parties. Elsa, over to you. Yes, thank you very much for the invitation. It's an honor to be sharing with you. And what we are doing in Mexico in regards of the accounting and sustainability standards, in the first place, as a fundamental basis to have a good regulations, is to classify companies in 2 large groups. The first one that we call public interest entities, and the second group is those that are not a public interest. The first one involves all those entities that are mandated to report to the public, like large banks, listed companies, trust companies, entities that might imply a systemic risk. These public interest entities are required to provide information, but in particular risk information. In this first group, with a focus on the international financial reporting standards must reveal, disclose information about risks and opportunities that have to do with sustainability. In Mexico, we decided to adopt this standard as a whole and all the implied elements and disclosure requirements starting in 2025. In the first half of 2026, we will issue the first report. This information is required in 4 basic information areas. That's metrics, risk management, sustainability, and governance disclosures. These entities will be are mandated to reveal this information in a separate report that is linked to financial reporting. And in this first 2025 publication will not include assurances. This will be required in 2026 in a limited manner, and in 2027 we will talk about reasonable assurances. There is not yet a requirement for the financial sector entities. These standards are being prepared. These mandatory disclosure requirements encompasses the value change that will certainly involve many non-listed entities, and that is probably the largest numbers that this includes the non-public interest entities. They are not listed, they are not mandated to be accountable, but are working together with listed companies or another public interest entity. The CNIF that I am honored to chair focuses on just a year ago, we launched the first publication that's called Sustainability Reporting Standards. NIS in Spanish, as a first step, will require these entities 30 metrics that are universally used or applicable. These metrics are based on a study that was prepared by the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, UNCTAD, that fosters sustainable business development. They conducted a world research, and they identified that these 30 metrics are the ones that are most reported and useful. This classification of companies is done because information users have different kinds of needs. A listed user needs to know about risks and many other metrics like strategy and risks. For those which are not public interest entities, they must be comprised in the sustainability scheme, and they are required to disclose their sustainable performance. With this information of these non-public interest entities will include these 30 metrics in the last financial notes to the financial statements. Assurance is optional, but this will help us to foster sustainable value change that in Mexico is the greatest challenge, because being sustainable, it means more than being just financial reporting. This is a strategy that we have adopted countrywide. Impressive work in Mexico. Thank you very much, Elsa. From what you just said, we will see the first financial reports in the first half of 2026. That's when the financial reform for all listed company will become mandatory. And now over to you, Eduardo, for your comments. Thanks very much for the invitation.
Logo com a consulta, né, vamos dizer assim, da IFRS Foundation para a criação do ISSB.
in 2021, 2022, especially with the creation in Brazil of the Committee of Sustainability, or CBTS. In that moment, we started to have all the stakeholders, all the regulators, the board, or Secure Exchange Commission, or the central bank, and the auditors in that process. And at the end of 2023, specifically speaking, in November 2023, the Commission they issued the resolution 193 establishing that's mandatory for open capitals listed in the stock exchange to adopt S1, S2. It was mandatory from 2026. So the process starts in Brazil with that first act, let's say informal, that might be divided in two stages. The one that comes from 2024 and 2025 from the voluntary adoption process for the open market companies. The companies, they publicly do the disclosure. We have two companies that launched the adoption of that path, being one of them Vale, one of the greatest mining companies, and Heine, which is another company in the selling clothing sector. They're the final stages of the reports for 2025 with data from 2024. Later, the Accountability Council, they issue a regulation, incorporating into their formal resolution the S1 and S2, especially translated towards Portuguese. So the companies from closed capital, private companies that eventually want to elaborate the report of sustainability according with the S1, S2 regulations, they can do it based on that document, and so it's going to be part of the accountant, the responsibility as some sort of an owner of the project, So the accountant becomes naturally, the informations are variable. They come from professionals from different areas, like environmental engineering, many segments. The accountant is the final compiler of that process. So we have those two facts. Recently, the central bank in Brazil, they launched a document, an own resolution, adopting S1 and S2 for the financial institutions following a timeline of adoption based on the size of the financial institutions. The greatest financial institutions are going to require to adopt first, and then according to the size, the small institutions are going to adopt progressively. It's important to remember the adoption in Brazil, like in Mexico, is comprehensive from S1 and S2. And so this is very important from the technical point of view, because looking at the two regulations jointly, you have a regulating structure different than what OTCFD was, which is the prototype used for S1 DS. When you look, for example, for S2, along with S1, and you discuss the representation, you discuss financial matters, you discuss the integration with the reports, with the accounting reports, it was that inclusion from the technical point of view, that was the motivation for which Brazil moved quickly to adopt those two regulations. Because one of the big problems that we have is the not integration of one report, the financial statement. They don't talk with the sustainable report. So that's maybe one of the main problems that we have. So this is very important to mention. So we adopted comprehensively without doing any sort of creation of particularities. One point that's worth mentioning in that stage, you know that there's reliefs, right, in S1 and S2, some enablers for first adoption. We have 2 years that are voluntary, which is 24 and 25, and mandatory from 26 on. So the commission in Brazil, the CBM, they established that those reliefs might be used in 24, 25, and 26. So to stimulate the adoption, voluntary adoption, and creating a line of knowledge of production throughout this period.
En realidad es importante establecer requerimientos y requisitos, pero es importante también entender que muchos de estos requerimientos de las normas están soportados en marcos de sostenibilidad y requerimientos climáticos que ya existían con respecto a...
Existed before regarding initiatives of report. We're going to go back with you, Elsa. Now we're going to go to the section of specific questions for each country. Please give us some more details regarding this segregation that you commented regarding public companies and private companies. Mexico shows, as an interesting case, the existence of a framework, I don't know if calling it simplified, regarding the regulations issued by CINIF, which is the Mexican Council of Sustainability Reports for non-listed companies, and the requirements, the complete requirements for the companies regulated by the Commission, National Commission on Values. Now, the question is, please explain, elaborate regarding this, and the answer from the companies regarding this issue, and if from the regulator side, there's some incentives to foster the application of it. Right, like we mentioned, one company that's listed in the stock exchange is forced to provide information, especially to their investors. The investors are really, they want to know about the risk, because if they transfer money towards investment or credit, it's materialized into a risk, so they might be affected. So the issue of risk is fundamental. Let's imagine a company, I'm going to explain with an example, a retail company. They are in their offices, they say, I have here my establishment, I have solar panels, I want to be sustainable, I have water measures to use water, I have inclusive policies and a series of elements that make them sustainable. In the moment that they turn and they say, "Is there my provider is coming?" and you know that because the provider is angry and because this is how it is. So this company is reflecting and says, if that provider doesn't reduce their contamination levels, I cannot be sustainable. Why? Because he's going to bring products with a carbon footprint. So this retail company turns towards its provider and doesn't ask for a climate resilience analysis. They say, tell me which are your green gas emissions. If you surpass a certain limit, I cannot hire you. So you cannot be in my value chain because I want it to be a sustainable value chain. So the information that's fundamental, that at least at this point, we are requesting from them to entities in the value chain, who are requesting information about their sustainability performance. And we start in Mexico from the baseline that information has to be useful for the user. That's the foundation. A regulation complies with its purpose when it helps to creating information. So we say, all right, now asking a climate resilience analysis doesn't agree with the requirement that we have now. So we established a series of what we called 30 metrics, 16 that require sustainable performance or evidence of the sustainable in relationship to the environment. Green gas emissions, water use, recycling water, waste that are being sent towards the environment, energy use, and some other social issues, like, for example, if there's inclusion policies, the salary gap, if there's obligations of the company to help the development of the employee, in matters of corporate government, if there's an ethics code, if there's measures for safety of information, for example, if there's this series of elements that might take us to think that the company is institutionalized, if it's a safe company. So we believe that this first step is important, and we trust a lot that it's going to be fruitful, because the companies that are coded in they know español, inglés. They're working in a similar.
Cada quien tendrá sus propias formas de trabajo, pero estas entidades estas normas nos van a ayudar a cerrar círculos de información como otro beneficio muy importante para las que están, ya decíamos, aplicando.
Companies that are already enforcing their regulations. We are helping both groups of companies. Just this month of May, we're going to send a greenhouse impact calculator to provide support to all companies. This will be publicly available and will help that these fundamental indicators, since now climate change is not the most important, but perhaps the most important, urgent issue that has to be addressed. And by September, we will be releasing a platform to identify water stress areas and protected biodiversity areas. We expect that these tools will help everybody to have a good view of their environment, and we expect that these strategies will not be used only for a group of companies and reporting, but to make all entities sustainable operating in Mexico. Totally agree with you. The impact is not just on the companies or from the companies, but the entire value chain that a company is involved in. And this is going to be particularly important for extractive industry companies, mining companies, and financial companies that have to measure issues how they are parking capital. Back to you, Eduardo. You were the first in fixing a mandatory implementation date. Can you mention some challenges, regulatory challenges?
Ela surte muitas dúvidas, mas para nós é fundamental pelo aspecto de se ter uma obrigatoriedade. Acho que esse é o primeiro ponto, né? Sem a obrigatoriedade, simplesmente o estabelecimento voluntário, eu acho que você não cria o engajamento para que as empresas, para que todos os agentes envolvidos,
so that everything involved in the process they can follow. What happens nowadays, people know that the commission, they're doing a research to understand the impact of the first year and how the companies they're preparing internally to do the implementation that's mandatory from 2026. So we have a fundamental point that's creating the obligation. So you have to comply with it. You have to conduct it. What we discussed in companies, internal controls is the first challenges, especially involving audit, creation of internal controls. For example, you take the guidelines of SASB. 75% of regulations, the SASB, they are quantitative. 25% are qualitative. For example, how do I create internal controls to assure that the qualitative information that's being presented, it complies its role or its worth from the point of view of representation? So from the point of view of implementation, which is a regulatory issue, the matters of education are one of the main ones that we found, because when we see, for example, for the initiatives of capacity building, knowledge ramping has so much material relevant, very important, but we don't have a way of knowledge necessary for the professional to educate himself and to implement the documentation, to implement the regulation. So we've seen it in the practice, despite many initiatives for educational, even for the creation of internal controls, we don't have a clear structure of which are the processes, like how we take it within a company. So a good part of the work now is the part of creating that doesn't exist now. We are used to saying, just in general terms, we compare ourselves, the adoption of S1 and S2 we compare it to the adoption of the NIFIS as a whole. In my opinion, this is an analogy that's dangerous, because everyone here in this room, we deal with accountability, we deal with it before adopting the NIFIS, but not necessarily everyone here gave sustainability reports before adopting S1, S2. So we're speaking about adapting one language or creating a report. Thank you, Eduardo. Gradual adaptation, helping companies. Thank you, Eduardo. Lunia. Costa Rica is known by its commitment with sustainability, as we commented before in the first part of the presentation. Tell us about the strategies that are being developed to facilitate transition towards companies or medium companies. Please tell us. All right. from school, we created a place, for example, in the website that's called CPA Sustainability, where we have more than 180 material or links that we want to be selected for our professionals and the audience. They know where to find information that can be reliable, how to do it, how to understand it, how to practice it. We work with updating the proposal.
Universidades, porque para que la
For sustainability to be a process, it's got to start in the classroom with the new professionals, young professionals. We also aim at updating the regulations, like the procurement regulations, but on the basis basically of streamlining the entire process. We adopt international standards, and we use the board's ethics standard as a complementary measure. We are working on disseminating ethical obligations in our profession so that the public and our members are aware of that. There is no such thing as a perfect world, but we have to be timely, and the time is now. So we have started working on creating an action awareness and for the people to see a return and to build a credible process. We have been saying this for several years, the importance of formalizing efforts that we have working on in an isolated manner. I would like to address the training issue because this is a two-way street. The training that we will have to follow is concerning financial issues to understand sustainability, material issues, the carbon accounting, fingerprint measuring, but also training towards the leaders and sustainability leaders so that they understand these concepts. How is the impact of balance sheets? What are costs? So how do you measure or how to present our costs? These are interesting concepts. And to wrap it up, we already ran out of time, but we still had a final round of comments. So let's take only a couple of minutes in this final round, and then we will open the floor to questions. Let's start with Elsa one more time. Of the three jurisdictions, Brazil, Costa Rica, and Mexico, you were the one that most recently set an adoption date. There are several countries that are currently assessing, evaluating that standard, like Peru. We do not yet have a formal pronouncement. What advice would you give us to take this adoption measure? This is something that cannot be postponed, but you have to go beyond just requiring a sustainability reporting. I think that it's very important to provide a competent to understand that this is not just a reporting matter. You have to create awareness on sustainability, and that being sustainable is at present a new way of managing a company. If we are polluting, if we are impacting society and the environment, we may destroy the environment, and nobody can conduct business in a dead planet. We have to create awareness about the importance of being sustainable, and that a company that is sustainable is not only more profitable and efficient and create greater economic value for its shareholders, but also a company that aims at or has as its in its mind to preserve an appropriate environment for people and the companies themselves, because let me say it when against, this is also a business issue. This is a fundamental issue. Thank you very much, Elsa. Eduardo? This is a process that started with a review of standards to aim at convergence, and then the currency of the standards was established, and in some jurisdictions it's mandatory compliance, and now verification the standards and auditing standards are being reviewed, and requirements are made for such verification. So the important question is, this is going to give a different objective or requirement to companies. Have you set up reasonable and limited verification standards from a very practical viewpoint? In coming years, we will all have to lead with verification of a non-financial information as such at present with present balance sheets. What recommendations would you give us in respect of the things that we should take into account when it comes to verification?
About auditing and verification is fundamental what we worked in the past years as a consultant in accountability with so many publics, and one of the ones that are demanding are the investors. And now we see in the importance of very reasonable for sustainability. We see many times information that are counteracting in what we have in the financial demonstration, in the financial statement, and what they have in the sustainability report. For example, clear example, net zero of green gas effects. You see companies that say they're going to have zero emissions of CO2 from a certain data. When you see the demonstrations, they don't have any reflection of that in their financial demonstrations. Why? Because there's a lack of integration between the two documents. What's the cost of the net income to acquire carbon credit for certain data to do the liquidation based on the emissions that are going to be compensated? Much of that contradictory information, they arise from the fact of there's not sustainability report, and it has to go through a process of audit that has to be robust, which is the reasonable insurance. That's important, this perception, because all the talks, when you go to the same place, we need information for good decision making, but the information that's not consistent, the information that's not believable, the information that's not reliable, that impression, it takes to the wrong decision. We finish with you, Donia.
In our audience, there are representatives from countries that are about the same size as Costa Rica. What recommendations would you give to these parties so that they better understand how to deal with their efforts for their companies to start this journey in terms of a cost and time? In the first place, as has already been mentioned, dissemination is critical for our actors to join the process to create a sustainable society that provides information based on standards. Getting support from IFAD and other players has been critical because of their support in participating in conferences, in preparing training, and to learn how to use the concepts of materiality and exemptions, and as tools to mitigate the fear of non-compliance. The standard is read from A to Z, but we have to look at materiality and transitory concepts to facilitate processes and the scalability of such processes, so that if large economic players are mandated to comply with these norms, this will result in a chain reaction along the value chain, so that the reports will become sustainable products. Now let's read some of the questions from the audience. I'm going to address them to each of you. The first question is for Elsa, because this is very much related to what you're doing in Mexico. Strategies do you think are applicable, or what requirements are applicable to involve companies that are not required to adopt sustainability and climate change standards? You mentioned the two frameworks for private companies, and from what I have seen very quickly, and I'll give you an example, but perhaps you can elaborate on it. For non-mandatory mandated companies are not necessarily obliged to talk about financial sustainability, and they don't talk about risk, and they don't talk. Yes, a characteristic of the package that we have used is that requires these absolutely obligatory 30 metrics. This is a sustainability report, and issuing these indicators. If I'm sick and I I go to the doctor and I am required lab tests, and then I asked only to do the relevant metrics. It's on basis of these metrics that the final result will be a diagnosis will be made. This may have been complicated for non-public interest companies to issue a sustainability report. In Europe, the European standard has concluded that for non-public interest companies, they are required to provide the metrics without a materiality analysis concerning costs and other things that can help us to better measure progress or than an absolute figure, because sometimes these absolute figures don't tell us what we want to know. So this materiality analysis in this standard has helped companies to more easily prepare their sustainability reports. Eduardo, help us with number 3. The third question. This is very specific to the Brazilian market. What are Brazilian companies going to do when they simultaneously quote in Sao Paulo and also in New York? This is an SBI. If there is something that requires these companies.
I believe that this situation, many companies have different types of reports. For example, the integrated reporting, it's not mandatory in the USA, it's not mandatory in Brazil, but many companies publish in Brazil being listed there as well. We have requirements from that are local, that they aren't compatible, they aren't required necessarily by the NISE, for example, or for the SNC. So it's a type of situation that we have the case nowadays, that you have certain jurisdiction, certain report that's not required in somewhere else. So not necessarily that's a problem. And what I believe it's coming back to the geopolitical issue of the reports in a structural way that motivated the creation of the own SSB. I believe that it's worth imagining that the Securities Commission allows the deposit of the information S1 and S2 for the interest of the investors in Brazil as well. In the case of New York, at least there's been a back step there assessing the requirements. That's something that we'll see in the coming months.
We are aware what is the current policy trends in the U.S. and New York, and I wanted to ask Duna, however, a question about the main challenges. Can you help us with the second question? What are the main challenges of small companies? So that, based on your experience, what are the main challenges of small and medium companies that will have to disseminate their sustainability requirements? And you have mentioned critical support like training regarding public policies to facilitate this process. The state has adopted incentives in the new procurement companies for SMEs that were already in place previously regarding procurement processes. Like, for instance, if companies that are equally scored, one of them is an SME, the contract will be awarded to the SME. And in procurement contracts will now be basically aimed at investing in these sustainability reports, because there's got to be a cost-benefit analysis. For the big challenge for them is what is their technology that they can better optimize their goods and services processes, and for training and prepare reports that exceed their procurement assurance requirements. Researchers are always limited, and they will always be. So the idea is to meet those requirements at the least possible cost. And this will be our last question. This is a question for Elsa specifically. and this will be the last intervention. What happens when a company identifies that their suppliers do not have a good sustainability and climate change standards? Have you provided for any sanctions for the anchor company and for the supplier companies? Is there something? No, there is no specific sanctions, but they are starting to lose their contracts and business, and they could not be included in the value chain. And in Mexico, we think that all companies are one value change. Sooner or later, they will also have to meet this requirement when it comes to commercial issues, as was debated several years ago quite extensively. What is the value of sustainability? What is the additional return from engaging in sustainable practices? When a company issued green bonds, it was sought to see whether that was a impact on the rate spread. So the question is, how much business are going to these companies that are failed to comply lose? How much business and financing will they lose? The business of their strategic partners because of increasing market regulation. Thank you very much to all of you. We have now reached the end of our allocated time. Please thank the members of the panel with a warm round of applause. And now let me turn it over to Alexandra. Thank you very much, Antonio. Thank you, Elsa. Thank you, Dunia. Thanks, Eduardo. A round of applause to thank them all. Some important in-house announcements before we break for lunch. Lunch will be in Terrazas del Mar, just across this hall, and we will resume at 2:50 for the breakout sessions. For the breakout sessions, please go to the breakout you may want to join. The distribution can be found in the C-event and in the agenda. All breakout rooms are on this same floor. If you need to make airport transport reservations, please go to the registration desk to reserve your transport. And at the end of the breakout rooms, please return the headsets. This is very important. And finally, at 6:30, there will be a cocktail party in this room, and in the pocket of the portfolio you received, you will find the corresponding invitation. Enjoy your lunch, and we will resume at 2:50. Thank you very much.